Good evening, and welcome back to the Revived Poets Society, where we bring dead authors and poets back to life for one last interview. Our previous host has fallen ill mysteriously, and I am her temporary replacement. Our second guest of the evening is the author of the world-renowned science fiction novel, Frankenstein. She survived 4 pregnancies and the death of her husband before eventually passing away from a brain tumor in 1851. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mary Shelley.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me onto the show. It's spectacular to see how the world has changed since my time.
Indeed it is. But we can talk about those things later. We do have a time limit, you know? So, Mrs. Shelley, do you care to start us off by talking about your own childhood?
Of course, one should always begin at the beginning. Well, my life began on August 30th, 1797 in London. Only 10 days later, my mother died from complications caused by the pregnancy and birth. My father was left to care for me and my half-sister on his own. He did the best that he could for the first 4 years of my life, and then he invited another woman to the house, Mary Claremont. She seemed to be immediately jealous of the attention given to me by my father and by guests of the house, so she took her revenge by treating her own children better than she did me. At one point, it got so bad that I had to leave the house and live with family friends. And I did come back, and that's when I met my husband, my future husband, Percy Shelley.
Ah, yes. Percy Shelley. He passed away in a flood in 1822, correct?
Yes, leaving me to care for our only living son. I wrote for profit at that time, and we lived in Italy. That was a hard time for us.
I'm sorry to hear that. So, shall we talk about your most famous work, Frankenstein?
Yes. It started as just a competition between friends to see who could write the best horror story. It was stormy outside, and we were trying to do what we could to pass the time. The others began to slowly wean off of their stories, stopping writing, but Percy encouraged me to continue my story, to develop it into a novel. And I had some dreams of reanimating corpses, and there was much science going on at the time where people were reanimating corpses and trying to do this. At one point, I heard my husband and his friend, Lord Byron, talking about somebody reanimating a piece of a worm, vermicelli.
Interesting. Now, could you give us a basic plot summary of your novel?
The novel begins with a man, Mr. Walton, finding another man dying out on the ice when he's on a trip to the North Pole. He brings in the man and finds out that his name is Victor Frankenstein, and once he's been nursed back to health, he tells Walton his story. So it begins with his childhood, growing up with his future wife, Elizabeth, and his best friend, Henry. When his mother dies of scarlet fever, he moves away to go to university, but he comes up with a project that takes months, reanimating a corpse, but then he finds out once he's finished, he's horrified by his creation, and he runs away from the from the monster that he's created. And he runs into his friend Henry, but he falls ill due to his due to being re-exposed to society. And so he plans a trip to return home to his father and his future wife, but he finds out that his younger brother has fallen ill. So when he returns home, he found out that a girl has been accused for this murder, and she's hung for it. And so he moves away he runs away to deal with the pain that he feels at this, the guilt that he feels because his monster killed his brother. So he goes out to look at nature, to look at this beautiful iceberg that he'd seen in the past. And that's when he runs into his monster again, who has learned to speak by living in this cave near this German family. And he learns to speak and read, and he tells Frankenstein his story. And he demands that Frankenstein build him a wife, and so Frankenstein goes out to a remote island and builds his wife over many days, but when he sees Frankenstein near the scene, he immediately comes to his senses and goes and dumps his supplies into the ocean. When he returns the next day, he finds out that his best friend is dead, and he's been accused for the murder. He spends days in jail with his father there, and he is eventually determined to be innocent. So he returns home and marries his wife, but then the monster kills his wife, and he chases the monster to the North Pole, which is where he finds Walton. And and that ends the circle of the novel.
Well, that's all the time we've got today. Thank you for joining us, Mary, and I hope that you have a wonderful afterlife. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Have a wonderful night, everyone.